Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
In this course, we're talking about grief and forgiveness. If you remember, we prefaced that by saying these typically go together. Grief is our emotional response to loss and disappointment. Loss and disappointment, we talked about how that's normal. We talked about the feelings are there as a gift from God. I'm just going real quickly on page 1. They're God's gift to allow us to deal with the real world. It is not Christian to put our head in the sand or escape from the world and say, forget it. I'll never get close to anybody ever again because I don't want to hurt. And that is the temptation when it hurts. But that's not what we're supposed to do. Grieving allows us to process and metabolize the problems we go through. We talked about how there are various ways to talk about grief. There's an enormous amount of literature on that. I'm just going over the 5. One of the standard ways to do it by Kubler-Ross's denial, bargaining, anger, and despair, and then acceptance. We're just going slowly through that, and in the meantime, if you haven't met the right specialist, Brock Caffey, I go to him each time we take a little break. Brock is a licensed therapist, and his business cards are available here and there, and he's here to help us serve the church as well. So I'll defer from time to time to Brock, and we'll keep teaching this, and I'm excited about that. Any questions or comments about anything last week? Before we get started, I'd like to start with that. Anything at all?
David.
Yes, ma'am.
Sarah wanted to say something last week, and she never got to say it.
Yes, that's how I'm going to start the whole lesson off, but is that, if there's anybody else before we get started, if you want to. Nothing else. So it's up to you. You don't have to, but it's up to you.
Well, I mean, a whole week's gone by, and I'm scared now.
The juices are flowing. All right, well, later on, if you don't get scared.
Maybe a little later when I'm inspired.
You're inspired and
yeah.
stuff? I hear you. Well, if you get inspired, you let me know, and because I told you, because I do want to hear it. That's right. That's good. Okay, we talked about denial, basically the response of no, I don't want this to happen. I don't want to go through that loss or disappointment. And bargaining going to happen. All these going to happen at the same time, different times. You can omit certain times. Anger is one of the most common responses to loss and disappointment. I'm looking at page 2 now. You can become angry with others, angry at yourself, angry at God. You can just pick some, angry at your pets, angry at the government, angry with your pastor. People pick all kinds of people to get mad at. We can be angry with the grieving process itself. I'm mad at it. I don't want to be sad. This is especially true when you've been victimized. Someone walks out on you, you get cancer, something happens to you didn't ask for. A lot of times we get mad that you're stuck in a process now. That's normal. We can also vent our rage or anger on people who represent our loss. Family and friends, doctors, clergy, rehabilitation specialists. I remember, and I've told the story before, but it's still vivid in my mind. There was a woman who was very active in our church. She was one of the elders at a previous church where I started. And I was close to their family. They were literally next door neighbors and had counseled their family. And one of the sons had gotten in some mess.
You're off again.
They're not working?
You're on and off. It says trying to reconnect.
Okay. Yeah, clap on, clap on. Well, that's recording. That's why I have the backup podcast. That's good. Hopefully, we'll see. Her son committed suicide. And it's a long story. And we were at Cracker Barrel, and I rushed Cracker Barrel, went back to the hospital, and by the time I got there, he had died. And so he was successful. And I was there with the family for a long time. And the mom's sadness and hardness, as it were, got worse. And she took out her rage, at least some of it, her anger toward me. And she got really mean. She got really mean and hateful toward me particularly. And no matter how much we did and loved on them and prayed for them and checked on them and helped any way we could, she just, any attempt, so comments on Facebook, comments on ever, she had a hateful, smart-aleck comment to everything I said. And eventually I had to just stop, so I had to cut the relationship off because she got very, very hateful. But I know in the process, which is extra sad because I was just the person who represented her son's loss. She's mad at God, and to her mind, I represent that. This is what happens. It can happen. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. And that's unfortunate. The husband had a very different response. He went through a normal grieving process, and as he said one day, came out of the cloud of the dark of despair, and that's how it's supposed to happen over time. And we can internalize the anger of our loss and maintain an attitude of condemnation and shame. That's especially when something happens you blame yourself for, whether you really did it or you just blame yourself. And there's a difference. I use these words on purpose, and I want you to make sure you understand this. Particularly in Christianity, we don't use these words typically in the church clearly enough. Guilt is a feeling of having done something wrong, of a behavior. It's remorse for behavior done. Shame is a feeling that you are bad. You are bad, you lack worth or are worth less. Guilt and shame are not synonyms, particularly not in the psychological world, but I'd say not in the Christian world either. So when I say this word, maintain an attitude of condemnation and shame, that's what I mean. Like, I keep beating myself up over and over and over for what I did. A lot of people do that even for things they think they allowed to happen. And they stay in a constant state of self-lambasting. The critical parent in your mind just won't stop. He or she, depending on your male or female, is shouting you all the time, I can't believe you. So anger, it can also be facile or very easy, simple to maintain a disposition of anger and look for others who will also share in your rage. We like company when we're ticked off. Yeah, isn't that right? Mobs form very quickly. We like that. We like human nature is what I mean. That's the picket signs and rage against the government, rage against everything, and it riles us up. Fire breeds more fire. So you could say more there, and I brought mine here a little bit, but those are things, we can be mad at all kinds of things. And I'm telling you, when you experience loss or disappointment, one of the most normal and common expressions of that is going to be anger, rage. What's good is feeling the anger. What's not good is staying in a disposition of it, and certainly not getting flamed by others. Instead, we must express our anger in appropriate ways. For example, journal our anger. That means literally compose it, write it, type it. Tell a trusted person how angry you are. Tell God how angry you are. If you find yourself telling the person or God or your journal for a long period of time, you're stuck in the anger stage. And people get there stuck for different reasons, and I'll talk about that in a second perhaps. But you need to keep expressing your anger in order to release it. But you don't move from person to person to stroke the flames of your rage. And I've seen people do that many times in the years too. They'll get someone, that is, man, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe it. Yeah, I'm mad too. And then the other person, let's say I dealt to Vanna, and Vanna starts after a while going, but David, I love you. Let's work on the feelings beneath that anger of sadness and maybe despair, and that way we can let this anger go. Well, I'll go to Sonia. Son, you know what happened to me? In other words, I'll just kind of go in person. I'm looking like, you're not giving me what I want. Some people do that as well. But we don't want to do that either. That's not healthy anger expression. Moreover, as always, absolutely avoid self-medication. Any kind of substance or behavior that you do to numb the pain is not a coping mechanism. That's not healthy. And I know, I appreciate how difficult that is when you've had experience doing it in the past. I've talked to many recovering alcoholics who then give their life to Christ, and they're different people, and they say, David, all I want to do is go get drunk. I've had a guy, this happened many times. One guy fairly recently said, historically I'd come home from work and go straight to the bar, but I didn't. I just went straight home. And I went, whoa, praise Jesus. Like that is a win. It's not a little thing. That's a big deal. Others would say, I'm so stressed out, I would have gone done this. I would have gone looked straight for weed. I would have gone straight for pornography or sex or whatever. I would have gone straight to something. Because why do we do that? It just hurts too much. And it feels so out of control, we want to do whatever it takes to not feel that anymore. But that's not healthy. That is not processing your anger. Guess what happens after the buzz wears off and the drugs wear off and you wake up the next morning? Guess what happens? It didn't solve it. Everybody knows it. But listen, but when you're in immense pain and immense anger, you're not thinking straight. Back to my picture of the day by the graphs, you're not thinking straight. In the moment you think, I don't care about tomorrow at 7 o'clock, I care about right now, and I can't stand this anymore. And so I'm telling you, I appreciate the deep, profound struggle it is, but that's not the appropriate way to have a coping mechanism of anger. It's not. So anger's normal. Getting a state, an attitude of anger and rage is not healthy. Self-medication not happy. You want to talk about it. You want to express it. I want to say one quick thing, and I'll hand it off to Brock. We have 2 children, as most, if not all of you know, and all through their childhood, and they're still 13 and 10. We worked early on as quickly as possible. We always spoke to them as much as possible like an adult, and that includes giving them and teaching them emotional vocabulary, because they're not born with it. They don't grow up saying, I'm distressed right now. They don't know how to talk that way. I know that because most adults have no idea how to use or talk about emotions, and children certainly don't, because I've met children like my own. And so you have to teach them. And so are you mad? Oh no. Yeah, that's anger. Or whatever, don't hit your sister if you're mad. No, I'm not mad. Yeah, that's anger. So what happens as their childhood, as they've gone up and matured, our job as parents, as healthy parents, is to teach them to help articulate how they feel. And of course, then we start getting them synonyms, and it becomes shades of meaning. They might be vexed or frustrated or anger, and we have different words we teach them. We teach them always, one, how to try to label it, identify it, label it. 2, that it's good to feel things. And that leads quickly into 3. We've told them 183 times. It's always safe to feel these emotions around us, including towards us. In fact, especially toward us. If you're mad toward me, I'm okay with that. I will sleep fine at night. You can tell me I'm mad at you, and I'm going to say, thank you for telling me. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I would grow up in an environment where you never said that. Ever. Lord, the wrath you'd pay if you're mad, if you told Mom. And then a lot of whole generations before mine were taught any amount of talking about negative emotions was what? Talking back. And that's wrong. That's wrong. It's unhealthy and wrong. And that stifled a whole generations of people to not be able to articulate how they feel. So we're working hard to help our children. Now, the other thing I'd say is, or label it, articulate it. It's normal and healthy to have feelings. They're safe to feel those feelings. And this last thing that we teach our kids. These are appropriate ways to express your anger. So we don't just say, don't do that. We don't just say, it's okay to be mad and walk off and go cook a meal. We say, and here are healthy ways to express your anger. And we walk through options. And sometimes they just know, you think it's a good way to express your anger by hitting your sister? They have to pause for a long time when they're real little. And no, that's correct. That's not a good way. What about this? As you give options, so we tell them, can you raise your voice? Yeah, you can raise your voice. You can't scream and yell and lose control. Can't do that, but you can raise your voice, absolutely. Can you breathe deeply? Can you say I'm mad? Can you look and act frustrated? Yep. We talk all that through. I'm saying all this to let you know it applies to you too. And you in Facebook land, you in podcast land, for all of us adults. So you might not have ever been told. You've never been ever told that anger is healthy and that Jesus himself expressed anger. I had a bunch of Bible verses, but I'm not going to go there. He was mad. We just express that anger in appropriate ways. That doesn't mean the person to whom you're expressing the anger can handle it. That's very important. Because sometimes we think in communication, I gotta be fully open. I gotta tell everybody how I feel about everything. That's not true. Not everyone can process your anger, because they weren't trained either to grow up and hear how anger is. So some anger at them might mean you're going to beat them up. It might mean a relationship's at stake. It might mean they feel shame. You never know. So you have to use wisdom in who hears about your anger, especially if it's toward them. And that depends. But that's enough for now. Brock, chime in here, brother. Will you move the microphone close to you there?
Yeah, I can do that. I always like to start with a question. Not really. It was interesting that you brought up something that was related to kind of a parallel topic, because I always see grief as related to our attachments to people. You obviously would need to be attached to something to experience the loss of that thing. I guess that's fairly common sense. Is everybody following me there? Okay. But who Who here was raised in a household where it was okay to express a wide range of emotions? Does that question made sense, right? But nobody, I didn't see any hands shoot up.
Maybe it was okay, but it wasn't necessarily practiced
Okay,
or model.
okay. So, and even though nobody raised their hands, if all of your hands shot up, I would say, my next question would be, okay, that may be a little surprising to me, but I would ask, okay, if you were allowed to express a wide range of emotions, was that always the case? And then some hands would probably go down, but I see where we're at. And I think it's pretty normal to experience, for a group of people, especially this size, for maybe one or two hands to come up, but would be really rare for a bunch of hands to pop up, because we don't tend to operate as parents in terms of ideals. I mean, I think most of us can complain about one or two things that happened to us in childhood, and that kind of be the case. But just to kind of move on a little bit more quickly, to emphasize the fact that all of these emotional things that David's talking about, they're all very normal experiences and normal reactions to loss. Even very minor losses. We talked about that last week, about even when you stub your toe, to experience some. I know what I say when I stub my toe, and I hope the Lord is not listening, but to experience some pretty intense feelings when you're really shocked about something and you experience that jolt of emotion. But more importantly, to be aware that some of those things we may not even register, or they might not pop up on our emotional radar, simply because the messages we receive consistently throughout our childhood and into our adult life, and if we get into the corporate world, that has an impact on what's appropriate and what's not, and we start to absorb all these different values on whether or not we even allow ourselves to recognize them and to name them. And as a therapist, most of the time when I deal with somebody who is very profoundly depressed, I can usually walk backwards through time and kind of get into some discussions about loss, and somewhere in there something got hung up, and a lot of times, I'm not saying all of the time, it does happen chemically, but much of the time it's related to getting hung up on some portion of grief or some loss experience that was not expressed fully, and maybe because of that labeling, or maybe just because there's some areas where people will go through life and they think everybody else might be able to see that you're experiencing rage, or maybe you feel ashamed of something, and you just kind of walk around it. It doesn't ever come up until many years later in some cases. So that's really where I was going with that. On this, I was writing points down as you're talking, David, and you went through a few of them, but on self-medication, just to re-emphasize that, worked with a lot of drug abuse cases and a lot of very, very significant substance use, but it's not always those cases that I'm most worried about as far as the impact on emotions. Some people, you can have some pretty serious substance use problems, and people hear about those on TV after overdoses, or you hear the worst of the worst, but there are people living pretty normal, functional lives who essentially put themselves in an emotional time capsule, is what I usually refer to as, and find out that, if you start dealing with a loss by medicating or distracting yourself, you're not going through the process of grief, and when you do finally wake up, when that is out of your life for good, you're going to wake up with years and years of denial or distraction attached to that, and all of the bad habits that are associated with it too. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a good reason for starting that, but it does mean that when you wake up, or if we're applying this to someone in your personal life, that when those people come back out of that hole or wherever they've been hiding, they're going to get hit with a lot of weight. So that's also another side of that coin to look at, that in the recovery process, grief can be profound, but dealing with recovery and withdrawal and physiological problems or even medical issues that have popped up, it sometimes takes a lot more resources to actually deal with that issue, so I wouldn't discount it. But the other part, it's a warning sign. Everyone's tempted it from time to time, so.
Well, a lot of weight can be literal too, because that's what I did with mine. I started
Okay,
poking in the food, you know,
yeah.
because Bill was dying by depression, and next thing I knew, after all was over said and done with, like, oh my gosh, 60 pounds heavier.
Yeah,
Right.
some of us do
Food
wear
is
that.
escape.
My depression was, that was my self-medication, was food.
You start feeling sad. We can talk about all the physiological reasons for that. You start feeling sad. Life gets kind of dull, and there are definitely limitations to how much serotonin and dopamine are floating around in those neuron synapses, the gaps between your neurons. So if it's not direct drug use like heroin, it can be something else that sort of gives you that little boost from time to time. And food can do that. Food, sex, gambling, all those things do it very profoundly, even show up on chemical tests and brain scans. So it's very real.
People can escape in video games. I've known guys who come home from a hard day of work, whatever, and they go straight to the video game. And these are grown men, 40, 50 years old, and they don't play with the kids because it's escapism, you know, whatever, or the food. Yeah, I mean, that's a very common one. And it's you know, of course, when food happens, usually we don't get self-medicated with a baked chicken and salad.
Mine was ice cream.
Right. No, it's just not food. It's foods and high in sugar and things like that. What's that?
You can get awful close.
You get awful close. But yeah, wouldn't that be something? Yeah, that's exactly right. If you find yourself, even now, if you're listening to me right now and you find yourself, you think you might be struggling with some kind of self-medication in any kind of capacity, oftentimes, and Brock can second this emotion, there's enormous shame with both sexual addictions and food addictions. But these kind of self-medication, a lot of times, and unfortunately sometimes it can be worse in a church setting where there's an expectation that's false, that people have to have their life all together. They have to have it all figured out and have no struggles and no problems. And whatever it's worth to you as the senior pastor of this church, you need to hear me say very clearly, you are safe to be imperfect, at least with me. Secondly, if you find yourself struggling, tempted at all with self-medication, the first thing to do is admit it at all to yourself as much as you can and find at least one trusted person to say, I think I might have a problem. Let's get this fixed. Let's get this whole. Let's get this healed. And if you don't have a trusted friend, come tell me. I only record conversations on Thursday, so come Monday through Wednesday. It's just a joke. Tell someone, receive the help. You don't have to stay in prison the rest of your life for that stuff. You just don't have to. And that exposure to, I always say, at least one trusted Christian friend who won't judge you and condemn you and how dare you be struggling with that? No, you don't need, that's not your good friend, period. I don't care how many Bible studies they lead. You need to find someone who's there with you in your brokenness as well and says, thank you for the honor of sharing with that. How can I help? And that might just mean stepping yourself to the hospital with them. It might be whatever it is. I was thinking that I want to emphasize in all these emotions so much working in church life. I'm not sure how much you get this in therapy life. I don't know, really, Rock. It'd be interesting to know. In church life, it's very common in counseling for people to feel ashamed of having feelings that are negative. There's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a faux pas. You can't have those, almost taboo to have those kinds of emotions, especially the negative ones, like anger, sometimes hatred. I'll tell you, that's a normal feeling. Well, you don't want to stick there and stay there, but you're feeling a strong rage, and that's the feeling you have. And I remember one woman years ago came to me, someone had sent her to me for counseling, and she said, this is years ago, I'm trying to fly here, she said, I want to meet with you. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, my ex-husband, a few years ago, he had an affair, I think with several women, and we got divorced, but I'm not mad. I'm not mad at him. I just want to maybe meet with you sometime to talk about X, Y, Z. And I go, she said it so quickly, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not mad. And I was looking shocked. I said, you're not mad? No. I said, I think you're really mad. No, she looked kind of troubled by that. I said, I think you're really angry. And she goes, no, because when this happened, I told my Sunday school teachers, and they said, whatever you do, you can't be mad at him. You got to forgive him. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
I went, oh. I'm so sorry you were told that. No matter how much they were your friends, they were wrong when they said that. And then she had this long pause. For the first time probably in her life until that moment, someone started validating that pain. And I said, they were wrong. You have every right to be angry at what he did to you. And there was just a long pause, silence. And so I'd be happy to meet. We met a few times. But that is unfortunately a normal process a lot of times in church life, that we're told you can't go there. And that is false nonsense. I don't care who says it. They're wrong. Jesus was angry for the right reasons. And in theology, we have a distinction between anger and rage and righteous indignation. And Jesus experienced righteous indignation. And we experience righteous indignation when we've been victimized. And that's a normal expression of emotion. We just don't want to get stuck there. If you find yourself stuck there for a long time, you've got some other grieving to go on. Okay, I'm going to move on. Is there any questions or comments about that? Or Brock, anything else? Can we move on?
No, I just didn't say in the microphone, yes, I see that all the time.
Do you really?
Okay. I mean, I don't know what I attribute it to all the time, but usually I say it's just, I think if you've been talking to people about issues for a long time, and I'm getting close to that, you almost dismiss that as just the waiting game. Like, okay, we've been meeting for an hour out of our therapy relationship now, so by hour 2 or 3, I would expect you to start showing some real emotion. And I think part of that's just an automatic way of working through that develops. But people do avoid the real hot button stuff or the real emotions. And I'm smiling because I'm thinking of running parenting groups is a great example of that. But I talked to a lot of parents who had even been, had court cases related to child abuse. They'd hit their kids at some point or something even worse. And even in those groups, people were afraid to start talking about whether or not they'd been frustrated by their children. It just was not appropriate. Now, that's an extreme example, but okay. I mean, I had the luxury of knowing that, in fact, they had been very frustrated, and even reading the police reports with some of those people individually, still had a very difficult time acknowledging some of those. So, yes, it's real, and but it doesn't change the fact that it's all there. It's just about how the human mind creates these blocks or these filters for our feelings, and once that filter's there, for any of us, I think it's useful just to know the filter's there and to go looking for that feeling every time something happens, because it's probably there. You have an unconventional way of hiding it somewhere.
And there are certain people I think are more prone to blocking us from admitting that, like parents. Mm-hmm. A lot of us are taught that the parents did the best they could, or you can't think bad things about your parents. I've met people many times at funerals, and I'll say, "What did they do that drove you crazy?" Nothing. Like, nothing. In 50 years, there's nothing they ever did that ever. But I know, and at funerals that's normal because we call it ideation. They tend to idealize, and that's normal. But that's just one of many times where people tend not to do that. I can't go there. I can't be mad at mom or dad. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Doesn't mean they're horrible people. Doesn't mean they ruin your entire childhood. You say, yeah, that made me angry when that happened. So sometimes just being mad. Despair, if we move on. Anything else? I was going to say, don't be mad at me, but that was kind of just a joke, but I thought maybe I'm thinking about teasing when I said, let's move on, but don't be angry. I'm just kidding. Despair can go by the word or expression serious sadness, deep grieving, and so forth. This is when we can become unable to contain our emotions of sadness and pain. Our personality can change severely. It really can when it's really bottomed out. We can be overwhelmed with anguish. Sometimes you just can't stop sobbing or weeping. People many times have asked, they'll say, David, I feel so foolish, I just can't stop crying. To which I always say, first off, it's not foolish, stop condemning yourself. Secondly, that's normal. This is called grief. That is, you're trying so hard to stuff it down, and all of a sudden it's bursting out. That's normal. That's bubbling over. But that's a normal process. We can feel compelled to retreat from normal life, routines, relationships. It's called escapism, right? We want to get away from those things. We can form generalized catastrophic beliefs. Stay with me here. Generalized means we take one instance or maybe two instances of a thing, and then we make it generalized. So this happens I'm just picking on us because this happens all the time in church life. That pastor burned me. That church burned me. Therefore, all churches are bad. That's called a generalization. And it's nonsense. I hear that all the time. I met a hypocrite. All Christians are hypocrites. That happens. I mean, this on and on it goes. That man hurt me. All men can't be trusted. I planted that plant and it died. I'm horrible with all plants. And so generalization. Catastrophic, of course, is the most extreme form of it. They're just out for your money, whatever. For example, it will never get better. No one can be trusted. It's best never to love again. I'm not good at anything. I have heard this and millions more. If this stage isn't processed efficiently, it can lead to severe depression, mental illness, detachment, and even suicide. So this is the bottom of the barrel kind of stage that you can hit early on and then get a little better and then bottom out and get a little better. Again, all these cycles can come in and out, but this is that part. And this is where I spend the most time slowing down on the process to help us grieve, as you see here. Instead, it's crucial to regain, actually before I do the instead, is there anything you want to add there, Brock? Because the instead part's long.
No, I think it's good.
Okay.
For some reason, I was thinking about sleep hygiene, but I think you're gonna get to some.
Okay, yeah, hygiene, yeah, the routines, yeah. Instead, it's crucial to regain some degree of objectivity in your pain, and you might need a therapist to help you see that. Because when you're in deep despair, this isn't like the same as stubbing your toe, which causes this, like, man, that really hurt. When you get to more severe cases of it, you genuinely might not be able to see any kind of objectivity. That is, you really genuinely will start to believe it will never get better. That's what people think before they commit suicide. It will never get better. People will be better off without me. They'd be much better off without my sadness. They're not able to see how that sounds ludicrous, because in the pain, it clouds and distorts the personality. You go, no, that makes sense. And so sometimes you need a therapist or a trusted counselor or someone to say, no, you're not thinking straight in the real bad times. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here. There's a lot of steps we might touch on and briefly, and then if we want more details about this, we can. Things like, number one, we must stop irrational thoughts when they occur. Refuse to let the irrational false thoughts and beliefs finish in your mind. And this includes refusing to condemn yourself for grieving and for not seeing it coming or doing more or whatever condemnatory belief you're tempted to repeat. And what I mean this is a very clever name. It's called Stop Therapy. Stop Therapy has kind of sort of saved my life. And not like Jesus, but okay. You know where therapy comes from? I think it's always good to know. Therapy comes from a Greek word, theopedo, which means I heal, or it means to heal. So that's why I like the word therapy, it's for healing. Stop therapy is the practice of exactly what I said here. It's when you stop the irrational thoughts when they occur. So imagine your thoughts are like a sentence, like, we must stop irrational thoughts when they occur. Let's imagine, will you play along with me here? Will you read that sentence? And I'm going to do this therapy, so I'm going to interrupt you.
Am I reading something?
Is that okay?
I don't know where you're
We
talking
must
about.
stop the irrational thoughts. You pick any sentence, I don't care.
Oh, you want me to read that?
But I'm going to practice. I'm deliberately about to interrupt you. This is on purpose.
When they occur, refuse.
Stop! Right, so the point is, you don't finish the sentence. And that's what thoughts do in our mind. We want to finish the cycle. And when we finish the cycle of obsession, this is a proven fact. Brock can keep seconding the emotion. Science demonstrates you're releasing little dopamine, little feel-good chemicals. And it's like the question of, why would someone beat their head against the wall all the time? Why do they do that? Because it feels good to stop. It releases dopamines, and then you do it again. And you do self-destructive behavior because there's a payoff to it. And even the most worst, horrible thoughts that we can happen, that we obsess about, when we finish the thought, we get a little ding. It's a little bitty treat, like you give it to a dog when they do a little trick. And so you have to stop you stop the thought before it finishes. And how do you do that? You can do all kinds of things. Some people use little rubber bands, put on their wrist, they'll go pop, pop, pop. Others do it by saying the word. The simplest is saying the word stop. You can say it aloud, stop, stop. You can scream it in your mind. You ever scream stuff in your mind before? You're thinking now in your mind anyway. But in your mind, you scream stop. I've done this, I do this all the time. When I'm struggling with obsessive thoughts, particularly in the middle of the night. And I have to say it 38 times. Stop, 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 stop. No. Like that thought just wants to finish of something nonsense or horrible from years ago. And what's extra worse, or what we call, I guess it's extra worse. Some of these are extra worse, but I kind of think of the worst. These are called intrusive thoughts. Everyone has intrusive thoughts. Those thoughts that come out of nowhere, and they've usually people are very guilty when they think them. I don't know what I was thinking. I would never hurt so-and-so. Why did I just think about that? Because you're a horrible person. Oh, yeah, I know I am. No, everyone has these crazy thoughts. And that's why, if you ever imagine, what would it be like to have a megaphone attached to your mind? And everyone could hear everything you're thinking. Yeah, at least like, amen. I don't want anybody to hear whatever. I know that movie with Mel Gibson, and What Women Want, and you can hear the thoughts like, whatever. No, you do not want. That is a curse. You don't want to hear. And of course, the movie is very tame. I don't like my shoes. It's not like, and I will kill him if he does it one more time. Hey, Bob! They're not hearing the real intrusive thoughts. We can think things that are completely against our own value system. When these come out of nowhere, and then we start looping them, that's why I call them worse, because we're extra scared they came out. And when this happens, you can stop them. You can stop them. If you're not used to this, it can take a while to get used to doing it. But you'll get real good to where you say, oh, that's that obsessive thought. I've already thought about this. I already gave this to God. I'm back on it again the 38th time. I need to stop it. And so when it starts up again, like a little loop again, like the tape player, stop, 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 stop. I've got tons more tips, but just brief, because we could do a whole thing on this one, I know too. I write things on my mirror at home. I've written off true beliefs on all kinds of papers and posted them, put them in my vehicle, I put them in my computer, because you want to stop it. And sometimes that's enough to let it go. Other times you got to stop it and replace it, depends. But it's like an addiction. They've done studies where they take people who are very much addicted to cigarettes and they put them in a round table and say, we're going to do it slowly to see how the power of addiction works. Once you take your cigarette packet out, they put it all packets in. Then, of course, the heart starts racing. Now, they say, how do you feel? They go around the room, how do you feel? My heart's racing, or I'm salivating, or whatever. They see that pack. And I want you to hold the pack. Now hold it. They hold it for about 30 seconds. How do you feel? They'll describe how they feel. I want you to slowly unwrap the pack. So, how do you feel? They're taking their time before they get to it. Heart's racing, whatever. Now, I want you to open up. I want you to smell it. And go in the room and hold it. And they'll go around there for a long time. I want you to take one out. They do piece by piece by piece. And the last time you smell it, now put it down. Now, how many of you right now, after this happened like 5, 6, 7 minutes, how many right now have this strong desire to smoke it as you did when we started? And across the board, they say we don't. And they found that if you could wait between, I think it was around 6 or 7 minutes, sometimes they say 4 minutes, if you can wait that long before giving in, it diminished. The brain did its thing, like, you won't give me that crack in my brain, I'll let it go. And it's kind of like that with obsessive thoughts. And the stop therapy cuts the juice off right away. That's one of the things we can do there. Anything to add on that?
It gets, and just to tag on to that research, it gets exponentially worse over time if you don't stop it. So I guess the idea is about dosing is what I would call it, but as your body does get used to things, it's not just the traditional sense of dependency and tolerance, but it is in that, as your body's amping up to do that, your neurons and the receptor sites are literally preparing to get a dose of dopamine or whatever it is. So if you have that habit, it's only going to get worse if you don't stop it. And there's a lot of different ways we can talk about it, but
does the stop therapy just replace?
It does not replace
it. If you
it.
continue to perform stop therapy over and over and over again, all of a sudden it becomes your obsession. The stop therapy itself becomes the obsession.
It could in a way. Physiologically it won't be there, and it's a much more natural thing because you're not plugging in that particular thing. What I would say is that you're going to have to plug something in there. Now that doesn't have to be, hopefully, doesn't have to be chemical, it doesn't have to be additive, it doesn't have to be, I think it would need to be something of substance. And like we're talking about, and that going through an actual, grief is part intellectual, part emotional, very spiritual, but something instead of heroin, And I take heroin out because I like how extreme that is. But let's remove heroin and now let's put grief back in there, and that's going to be a multiple part process. But the stopping is just the beginning of that. I would say, yes, it could be considered compulsive in nature because you're repeatedly doing it, but it's a positive compulsion to stop that kind of temptation from getting in the way of a natural process. So yeah, in a way. Doesn't operate probably through the same mechanism though, because literally stop, yeah, you're stopping something, but you're beginning something else, and that maybe that's gonna be a lot of work too. You're gonna be doing some heavy emotional lifting from that point on.
Hopefully replacing it with something else good. and
Something, yeah.
Not another bad thing.
Mhm.
Some people just transfer.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you stop that too, that's right. And so I tend to, I either stop and I don't say anything, or I stop and say, or I say, I've already released that to Jesus, I've already released that to God. And I picture letting it go. It'd be real hard to get obsessed about it. I do know people I've counseled who feel a little paranoid that they should be doing stop therapy all the time because they feel so screwed up. Like, I feel like all day long, all I'm doing is stop therapy. But I've never met a person who spends a long time doing that. That is, they only get that way paranoid when they just learn this. And they realize they have been thinking some false nonsense for a long time. And that's a hard habit to break. So in my experience, I haven't found someone who just never, I don't do this in normal routine. I mean, I can go through several days while I don't have to practice this at all because I'm not having intrusive, negative, obsessive thoughts. When they come up, I go, oh, stop there, I forgot. Like, it got me again, but not this time. On that thought right there, it's very conscious. In that sense, and that's compulsive.
Just to continue.
Pat, sorry, Pat was hand up.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, I've been doing this stop therapy and didn't even realize it.
Good.
It wakes me up in the middle of the night, I'm sleepy, and all of a sudden I got this craziness going on in my head, weird things that, I'm like, okay, stop, okay, devil, get away from me, leave me alone. But I've been doing this for a long time, didn't realize it had a name.
Good for you. So you've been doing it for a while, didn't know it had a name. Good.
It interrupts my sleep, and that
Good.
makes me angry.
Yeah, there you go. Good.
I want my sleep.
I want to see. Leave me alone, mind. Good.
But I was gonna say about the cigarettes too, you was talking about that? I'm ashamed to say, I smoked for about 50 years. I quit 4.5 years ago, I lost 5. The bad thing about that is, I dream I'm smoking a cigarette. And I wake up coughing and gagging and choking. I'm like, and it's so real that I think I'm really doing it. And I'm like, why are you smoking this cigarette?
In
And
bed,
I guess
it's
I'm like,
dangerous.
oh, it was a dream.
Don't smoke in bed.
I hate that too. That makes me angry. Because, my lungs feel like they're just filling up with it. Because, oh God, there's nothing worse than the next smoker, and I hate the smell of it.
Woke up with your cat's tail in your mouth?
I don't
Yeah.
understand how I did it for so many years.
Yeah.
And now it wakes me up,
Wow.
choking and gagging.
Bless your heart. Those are nightmares. And before it brought, one of the powerful things about stop is it's not condemnatory. Stop is not, you're bad. You don't follow up stop with, I did it again, I'm a loser, or I'm never going to get better at that, we're back. Stop it. Stop. Those self-condemnatory thoughts are not the way to go. They don't help you heal. And that is not what God's thinking about you. God is not thinking, you're a miserable son of a gun. I can't, that's not what he's thinking. Stop it. Knock it off. So, Bart, you going to say one thing before we move on?
Well, I like to use the analogy when I'm working with somebody on that kind of a thing you ever worked with a horse before or a big animal that gets kind of jittery once in a while, and yet you usually, there are people who reach up and whack them once in a while, and that, if you ever watch that dynamic play out, sometimes it doesn't go in the handler's favor. But it's a lot better if you get them and you can make some kind of eye contact and you can start to get on the animal's level. So in this case, I would be the animal if I were having the thought, and that you'll see people who are real good with animals kind of easing them into the stop part. They're like, hey, that kind of thing. And usually the spirit of the stop is kind of like let's go ahead and stop now. That kind of a thing versus the angry stop like you were talking about. And we had different language to pick up on it.
Sometimes it works with kids too.
It does. It works very well with kids, especially when they're prone to rages and even rage blackouts. The last thing you want to do is go in and match the energy level. I've seen that tactic I've seen that tactic not work very well. Sometimes it seems like the only thing you can do, but it's usually better you got to get in there and try to. It may take you a while, but it works.
I just have a question about that rage blackouts. What is that?
That's
Because I always wonder if that's what my dad does.
That's one of those how long do you got sort of topics. So I think we
Okay.
can definitely
Talk
talk
to you
about that.
later.
I'd love to talk about it, but
There are
anyway.
people who say, I do not recall that, like they lost
Yeah.
themselves. They lose control.
Yeah.
My
It's
dad
like they
has
lose
no
their
idea.
conscious center.
And that
You can
did-
tell by looking at his eyes too.
in
He's still
summary,
that way.
you're gone, so stopping, it's kind of in another, it's on a completely different plane, as I'm sure you can understand. But that's stopping.
When Hayden was real little, like 12, I'm just kidding, he was real little baby, and sometimes he would cry so much, I knew his cries really well, which is really cool. I was like, he's hungry, he's thirsty, whatever, I could tell. And sometimes he's just mad because he's mad. He couldn't contain himself. He just was still, and I mean, everything was clean and dry and whatever. And I knew there was a few times I could tell he just lost control. He just can't stop the rage. And so I'd blow in his face. I go, he would, and I go, by the second or third time, he goes, done. Lane goes, why are you blowing his face? I said, watch
I'm not
this.
gonna win this one.
Yeah, I'd say, watch this. And you just see his everything, like, what just happened? Every time. Now I went like, I was just going, and every time it worked.
You were stopping him.
I was stopping. That's my point. And I picture myself that sometimes. Sometimes if I'm that kind of rage, it's like I was saying, just okay. And when you're in that moment, there's a degree of objectivity that can come back. Anyway, so there's more there, but man, I'm telling you, stop therapy is a way to stop the despair. Like, I'll never get better. That generalization, the catastrophic, that you need to stop that.
When you do the stop, you can it kind of makes an opening for rationality to maybe
Yes.
come into yourself.
That's right. And remember, that's where we're fighting against irrational thoughts like it'll never get better, no one can be trusted, I'll never love again. That's false. These are all false nonsense. Like, stop those thoughts. You want to maintain some form of normal routine. Continue to eat, continue to take a shower. Well, David, it's so easy. When you're really depressed, that's not easy. It's tough. But you do your best to try to have some kind of routine. Everybody will tell you this. You need to establish some routine and keep doing it. You just, if not, every single time you don't and you retreat and you escape, you're teaching your brain chemistry. That's what's the proper thing to do, which means it gets more safe. It's like a little addiction you start. You fight against that by doing some kind of routine. Yeah.
Maybe no one will want to be near you.
Maybe no one will be around near you. That's right. But someone's going to, and you do your best to get out. And praise yourself when you do it. I know many people will say, how'd your day go? Well, I got up and took a bath. Woo! That's a good deal because they've been lying in bed for 4 days straight. I mean, but some kind of routine to get your blood flowing. And exercise is a great one. Walking, whatever. Give yourself permission to be sad. You've got to give yourself permission and do it. Do it. And Brock, I'm curious what you think about this. In my experience with grief, and in my line of work, it's one of the number one feelings people have. I have found if there's one of the most common problems I find with a person is repressed grief, it's because they've not given themselves permission to grieve. They've done all things around it, perhaps. But I finally ask them, I always ask them, have you cried? Well, a little bit. Your mom died, your husband died, or she walked out a little bit? Like, why not? And either because they don't have their permission, they felt it, or their mom never allowed them as a kid. At some point, it's just they've got this bottled up grief and they don't feel permission to do it. And you've got to. You've got to tell yourself, it's okay. It took me a long time to get good at crying. I'm good at it now. I guess I'm not an expert, but I'm good at it now. I can cry at movies, I can cry at songs, I can cry at commercials, if the spirit moves. My kids go, Dad, do you ever cry? I've never seen you cry. I said, well, you've seen me a couple times. They didn't know it. I said, oh, yeah, I cry. Yeah, I do. I mean, I want to let them know, yeah, Daddy cries. That's what men do. It's okay. It took me a long time, though. Men aren't taught to cry. They're taught to be mad. That's appropriate, not sadness, and that's just stupid. But when you give yourself permission, and it started by telling myself, David, you have permission to cry. And I started by journaling. Certain music would help me. And then journaling really helped me. And then I get to a place where I just open the journal, write like 2 words, and start crying. Boom. And I'm like, woo! But that was growth for me. Because then I thought now I don't have to journal to get there. So mine came in stages. I don't know where you're at. But you've got to give yourself permission. Ecclesiastes 3:4, John 11:35, Romans 12:15. Jesus wept, Romans 12:15. Weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. Christians should stop thinking or saying or implying ever that it's not okay to be very, very sad. You cannot heal if you don't express how you feel. You got to talk explicitly about what you're feeling to someone you trust. You write it, you journal it, what you feel, whether you can or cannot speak with someone about your loss. Even if you can talk to a therapist, journaling is phenomenal. By the way, listen carefully. Thinking about it over and over is not therapy. That's called obsession. Or worry, that's rumination. Oh no, that's not therapy. God designed us that when we get it out of us, either by written form, and studies demonstrate writing it is more therapeutic for most people than typing. There's something about the writing about it that helps more. But if you can't write, you can't type, talk about it. I told one woman who couldn't do much very well, and she raised 4 kids at home, I said, then turn your phone on record and walk around and talk to your phone. And that's what she started doing. It helped her a whole lot. Find a way to get it out. You have to get out what you're feeling and describe it. And you don't think about what you should be feeling. You think about what you're feeling. I use an analogy all the time because it's great. If I go to the thermostat over there and go, you should be 78 degrees. You should, that's just ridiculous. It's just telling what the temperature is. It's silly to condemn that temperature. And it's silly to condemn how you feel. Your feelings are nothing but emotional response to what you perceive to be reality. And you should listen to them. You should listen to those emotions. So you've got to give yourself permission to do it. And if you're not good, I'm repeating myself, you can get good, especially men. It's time to grow up, especially fathers, and teach your kids how to cry. So that's how you do it. You start by doing that. You've got to do it. Christians cry, men cry, women cry. Tell God all of your pain. And because of time, we won't look all this up right now. But tell God your pain and know for certain that God cares for you. You need to know that. Tell him. I picture myself often talking to him like a parent figure, a Heavenly Father. That's what he wants me to see him as a father who cares for him, me. Not some mean old judge, just can't wait to send me to hell. But a caring father says, come talk to me. So I tell him in my prayers. If someone really hurt me, I tell him that. I'll say, God, so-and-so really hurt me. Or I talk to Jesus. Jesus, when so-and-so did that to me, he really crushed my feelings. I tell him. I tell him like I'm talking to a person because he's listening because he is a person. And I know that he cares about me. And God can heal and redeem your pain if you let the process. And there is hope. I love in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 when Paul says, sisters and brothers, he really says brothers, but in Greek. Brothers and sisters, we don't want you to grieve as those who have no hope. Now it's possible to take the Greek as, we don't want you to grieve like the ones who have no hope, like the pagans. But I don't think that interpretation is correctly. I think it's supposed to be, grieve as those who have no hope. That is, it's okay to grieve. But we don't grieve as people who don't have a hope that's going to get better. There's a bottom to the pit. Christians have no business thinking that it'll never, the pit is limitless. And that's silly. There is hope. And I said this on purpose. God can meet you within the Christian community. So stay plugged into meaningful, healing communities. Your gut will tell you to run and flee. And I've asked people, why have you been in church a long time? They'll start talking. Basically, they're very sad. Something really happened. Why'd you start going to church? I was just doing it around people. I just felt so embarrassed. I sat in the back of the pew and I just started crying. I don't want people to see me crying. Why not? Well, because I'm crying. No one wants to see that. I said, that's false because I want to see it. Because I care about you. Well, you have to. You're the preacher. Well, no, that's not all I am. I'm actually a human. That is my day job. But I care about you. But people make up all kinds of reasons to bail out, and I'll tell them it's one of the worst decisions you can make is to untie or get unplugged, whatever metaphor you want, from the Christian community. And I am too aware that the Christian community can betray you and hurt you. The worst betrayal I've ever experienced in my life are so-called Christians. That doesn't mean all Christians are that way. And it doesn't mean all churches are that way. And it doesn't mean all small groups are that way. So do not get unplugged. If you want to help heal and grieve and feel like God cares for you, God can speak through you. And he speaks to you and he can speak to me, all of us to encourage one another. I love what Paul says in Corinthians. He says to the Corinthians, may the God of all comfort you. And so the comfort which he comforts us, we might be able to comfort you. And he does. He does. I'll say this last little bit, Brock, real quickly, and you can finish up. Read good books. And I list some books there. Coping.org is a good website. There's all kinds of good literature on this. And moreover, one more time, avoid self-medication. That does not make you cry more. It numbs your pain, and that's it. Before I wrap up on that, Brock, anything, or anybody else, question or comments?
Grief.org is one I tripped on last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and Grief Share has a website, and they share resources pretty openly too. Grief Share is a faith-based group curriculum, I guess I'd call it, for grief and loss. But those are some other places on the internet. That interweb's wonderful for information. And then, what else was it? I like the point about the Christian community part, but and specifically because of the qualities, the general qualities. I want to be careful to allow room for mistakes, but the general qualities of families, but the general qualities of a Christian family are very important. The qualities of a Christian family. I put an attachment a handout about attachment on there, but very quickly, Christian families tend to have a lot of the qualities that are talked about as fostering healthy attachments in children, and I think that's a lot of it. I'm trying to sum it up here: warmth, but also to create an environment where we, as humans or as children, are able to experience loss in a safe, manageable way, and that's a very, very important thing. Our families. The good enough families, if we have one of those, will help contain us through those losses, so that we can move on and have the consistent and safe experience of knowing that even though this is a horrible experience we may be going through, that it will get better, and I'm not going to be obliterated because of my loss. And in the same way, Christian communities have the greatest potential for being able to do that as well, even if it's just about pure physiological relational needs at that point for the person. It's still better than not having it. And that's as a therapist, but also as a Christian. But I think it's an either or thing. It can be that. So it's a good alternative. There is no other alternative for it. I don't think that accepting anything less would be an appropriate recommendation, even as a professional. So we get that kind of containment for each other. And yeah, we're not perfect, but it's not about, there's even a line here on this attachment handout. Attachment is about parenting, and grief and loss is about attachment, but it's about attachment's about parenting, not perfection. It's all about learning and teaching and fostering an experience where imperfection will happen. This whole presentation is about imperfection. So I think that's an important thing to keep it in our hearts, because as parents, but as human beings, we deal with imperfection on a pretty consistent basis, and we need to learn how not to roll through it as if nothing happened, but how do we adapt, and how do we get stronger, and how do we get better because of it. So that's it.
Amen. Thank you, Brock. Any questions, comments about this so far? Anything at all? Anything? Are y'all comfortable temperature-wise? You can open the windows if you're warm. You're fine? You're fine? Guess not?
I don't know if you're going to cover this later in it, but you mentioned that stop therapy is very helpful for thoughts, but you've also said behaviors, just briefly. So I'm just curious, is that something that you would recommend for behaviors as well? Because it seems like with behaviors, you really have to experience that emotion immediately when you stop that behavior or whatever it is, versus stopping the thoughts. It's more like a impulse, it seems.
Yes.
Okay.
Stop therapy works for thoughts, obsessive compulsive thoughts, and it works for behavior. And that's like the idea of like the cigarette analogy for therapy. They've tried that is the behavior itself. They're stopping smoking, and what they did was lengthen the amount of time before they could actually get to the finish line. To use my analogy of thoughts, they didn't let them get to the period, the end of the sentence. They stopped in the first few words by letting them smell it and whatever, and then put it back down. So they didn't get to the period. That's exactly right. And that's how you change habits. That's how you change habits. You cannot indulge. You just cannot indulge whatever the habit is. And if you can wait just a short period of time for almost any habit, it's a way of stopping it. And some people do that. I get a beer on the way home every time, or I get the donut, or I get 14 Big Macs on the way home. Well, I need to go a different direction, or whatever. Just long enough to allow that sensation of I gotta have it. And it will go away. It will not stay there for the next 10 hours. It won't. And that's how you stop it. And then on a particular behavior, then you have to replace it with something else. There's a book called The Power of Habit. There's all kinds, if you want, I can tell you afterwards. There's all kinds of good stuff on that. But it does work, yeah. So thank you. Great question. Thoughts and behaviors. On behaviors, you can, if it's real strong. You don't always have to say, I'm going to eat that donut. Stop. Okay. I mean, you can do that on Sunday morning. But I have said stop to myself when there's a big fat cinnamon roll, because I don't eat all that, try to eat all that on Sunday morning. I'll go, stop, go the other way. I to myself, nope, just keep going. You got nothing to see here. That's what I'll say to myself. Just keep turning left. Yeah, in that sense.
But in all seriousness, though, sometimes I feel like the behavior is, because that's a way to mask the thought that you might be having, so you kind of, or control that thought that you're having, so you conduct that behavior. So if you were able to stop that behavior, it seems like, not seems, but when you stop that behavior, you're actually really experiencing that feeling that you're trying to control and stop that feeling. Does that make sense? So
Say it one more time for me.
Okay, so I feel like the behavior part is a little more intense than the thought. And maybe I'm just, because you're trying to cover up that thought by doing the behavior.
You're sabotaging yourself. I think that's-
So you're saying the behavior could be more intense because you're covering up a thought about something.
Right.
It can be,
So-
but it doesn't have to be.
So, yeah, not,
sure.
and I'm thinking more on a deeper level, not donuts or
Yeah.
cinnamon rolls. I'm thinking more on a deeper level, so if you're to stop that behavior, it seems like there'd be something more intense to stop that, besides just stop therapy. Does that make sense? Otherwise.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't just,
That'd be cold turkey, right? That'd be considered just cold turkey. Just
right,
to
and
say-
that can happen. That
Yeah.
can happen. It's not as often, but it can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not implying, or not trying to imply to anybody, that stop therapy is the only way to stop a habit. And also, it's not all addictive behavior, the compulsive behavior, which is different from obsession. OCD, obsessive compulsive, is when you do both.
Right.
Compulsive behaviors are not always driven by a particular thought. It's not. The thought itself is to some degree conscious. And so we can have such a strong desire to go meth or crack or whatever that you're not thinking about it. The drive just says go do it. And that's different from a thought beneath it. They might be had originally been masking a thought of my dad hated me and I'm depressed. But there was just being in the addictive behavior itself does not have to be masking some kind of thought in that moment. Originally it probably was, but it could have been modeled, and there's all kinds of reasons of why they could start it. But if it's there in therapy, you'll bring it out. The good therapist will say, okay, because usually we're both thinking and doing creatures, and so at some level, that's
Some of
good.
it can be a mindset,
A mindset.
like with my quitting smoking, okay? But it was a mindset. I went cold turkey. One night I'm sitting there, July 24th, 2013. I have 3 cigarettes left, okay? And I'm like, I'm lazy. I really don't want to hop in my car and go to the store and buy some more cigarettes. And I'm like, I really don't want to spend money on these darn things anymore. They're expensive. I'm only doing I'm down to 3 packs a week, which is good. You know, but I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'll finish these 3 cigarettes, I'll go to bed and go to sleep, and I'm done. I won't play anymore tomorrow. You know, I was testing myself too. Lo and behold, I did it. And each day that went by, it got a little easier and a little easier and a little easier. But it was my mindset. And I have to admit, over the first 2 years, I was tempted. I said, let me smell your cigarette. I was tempted to ask for one.
Sure, yeah, right.
And then I was like, no, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So I would just walk away. And the next thing I knew, I was like, get away from me with that stuff, will you? It smells horrible. I don't even want to be around it. So some habits, whatever, can be a mindset. You have to make up your own mind, though.
Right, and I appreciate the mindset of getting out of the habit. But to use 2 things. One is to kind of tag into what she was saying. Most people who are addicted to cigarettes aren't hiding a thought when they're smoking. They feel the urge to smoke, I want a cigarette, smoke.
Yeah.
It's not I was thinking something, then I need to hide it by smoking. And that's not ever, it doesn't make sense, that doesn't happen all the time. It depends on what the issue is and why they started and why they're doing it.
Well, some people hide the smoking, too.
Right, but I mean, it's not always hiding a thought, it's just an urge because they're addicted. Their brain say it's time to have nicotine, and okay, I'll have nicotine. By analogy, when you said there comes a time, and I go, oh gross, I don't want that anymore. That's what we do in our minds when we finally stop the obsessive thought. Whenever you get more healthy thoughts in your life, which we're supposed to have, that's the ideal when we're healthy people, when you have unhealthy thoughts, we have a real visceral ugh. And I mean, that happens it's supposed to happen when you find yourself, and it's, one of the best signs of healing and recovery is when you think something, all of a sudden like intrusive thought, and you go, oh, why did I think that? I used to think that all the time. I forgot I used to think. Oh, Lord Jesus, that's a breakthrough, because you realize how far you've come.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to be disgusted by how you used to be. Not mad at yourself, but the thought of, I can't believe I said those horrible things about myself. I really was unhealthy. I really was sick for a while. I was really wounded. I'll move on very quickly, and there's just something else, because I want to get on to acceptance tonight if we can. Anything else? Thank you for that, and thank you. There's more work on habits and stop therapy, and you ought to look into it if you haven't. It's worth your time. It's worth your time. If not, I'll stop you. Acceptance is not when you feel all hunky-dory. We don't do the things you've been doing along the way, basically. You don't deny it. It means you're living a past denial. You don't deny anymore. You're able to articulate the loss of exactly what happened. You're able to label it, name it. We don't bargain our way out of the loss. We adapt appropriately to what has occurred. We combat irrational thoughts with rational thoughts. We're able to articulate our hurt and pain clearly, and able to express our emotions freely and appropriately. There's a degree of self-confidence in our capacity to make it. You'll have a sense, and I've seen it many times, praise God, they'll say, no, I think I can make it. I think I'm going to make it. I really do. There's a sense of I'm going to make it. They're able to articulate it, talk, and so forth. And that's when you know you're getting to a level of acceptance. It doesn't mean you're never sad again, especially when it's a severe loss, like losing a spouse, a child, these horrible things. You're going to cry. On their anniversary, perhaps, Christmas, special music, a tune comes on. 5 years later, a tear comes to your eye. Oh, must be in terrible grief. No, you're still being accepted. It's just that's normal, healthy. That's normal. But you know exactly what it is. You don't condemn yourself. You should be over this by now. You don't do all that nonsense judging your thoughts. You go, I'm sad. You allow the tears to come. You cry about it. You think that reflective, happy thought about I miss old souls. I miss them. I love them. And you move on. That is, you're able to express it, metabolize it, as they say, and then you move on. And I like how Warren Williams said it, 4 main tasks of healthy grief recovery. You accept the reality of the loss, you work through the pain and complexity of grief, you adjust to the environment, and you move away from grief and longing for what is lost to finding a place in memories as you move on. I like to think of acceptance as accepting it as a chapter in your life, but you're no longer in that chapter. You close it, and you might be 15 chapters later and you realize you really were 15 chapters later, but you still kept sticking your nose in that old chapter. But you might be just the next chapter of your life. It's in your history. It's in your life. You don't want to and you can't erase it anymore. You did want to. That's before you grieved well. Now you don't want to. You realize that is part of my past. I don't feel compelled to go back and reread that chapter every daggum night when I can't sleep, or every other Saturday, or every whatever. I accept it's part of my past. And when things trigger me and I go back in that chapter and I do a couple paragraphs, I will naturally feel some emotions. They're not nearly as intense as they used to be. I don't feel compelled to keep reading every word. And I don't think my life is over. I read it and go, boy, I remember that. That was a bad season. That was really sad. You can turn the page back to where you today. Does that make sense? Acceptance is not, in that sense, it's closure, and that it's part of the book of your life. It's not the sense that it's denied and bargained with and ignored. No, that chapter has a name. That was the time he died. That was the time she did blank. That was the time I failed miserably. That was the time I made that horrible mistake. And it might have been years, but that's the name of that chapter. But it's just a stinking chapter. And you accept that now. You're not ashamed of that. You might regret it in the sense that if you do it over. But you're not ashamed of it. You could tell the appropriate people, yep, that was part of my past. Not now, though, but it was. I'm able to do that. And God willing, when it can happen, not all the time, but when it can happen, God willing, you use that chapter for His glory, for other people who have that same stinking chapter. And you go, don't get stuck there. Don't be like me. My chapter was 83 pages long. I wish it were 14. Don't let yours be that long. I was there for too long. So let me help you. And that's how support groups and trusted friendships can help. And that's that vulnerability that can help. And you don't have to do that for the healing process, but God can use it. Before I move on, anything about that you want to say?
I just thought it's interesting to bring up that acceptance doesn't mean that it doesn't feel anymore. And I was even reading some old books that I had and really, really good research on grief and loss early on. They talked about the hydrodynamic model of libidinal energy, which is basically of emotional energy they had a hydrodynamic model about emotional energy related to grief and loss, meaning it was like a water tank is the way they would describe it. And there was a certain viewpoint, and not too long ago, in the 50s or so, where this group of behavioral scientists thought that if you were able to grieve completely, it was just a matter of draining that tank of energy, and at a certain point there would just be a little bit left, and that was manageable, and that was what the goal was. And I think more as we've gone along and maybe done even a little more anecdotal sort of research where people have talked about their experience, it's not that at all. It is the emotions will always be there to some degree, and it doesn't matter how far away from the event you get, it can always build back up. So there's always that constant thread, and it really has a lot to do with allowing yourself to continuously go through the process. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but literally that's what it's going to take. And theoretically, you have a loss, you continue to have emotions, and at some point way down the road you start to ignore the feelings as they come back up. They could build back up, and it could get bad again. I imagine I may run into something like that at some point in my work, but anyway, that's all I have. I thought about the water tank. I'll call it the water tank theory of grief, because that is a total myth. I know that when I started as a therapist, I thought we need to get as much of this out over time as we can in a safe environment. Someday it won't ever be an issue again. Well, that's dead wrong. But that's in our mythology or in our belief system somewhere, and you'll run into people if you talk to them about it that there are some people who really believe that about grief. That after I've done my time, it's over. I've done my work. It's done. It's not there anymore. Let's move on.
You should never be sad. Having said that, when you occur, though, in my experience, that the intensity of grief should diminish. When people, and normal people, like I know that people lost to suicide, it's standard to go through a year or more of intense grief. His was almost exactly a year to the week almost. He said, I finally got out of the flock. He's still sad, he still misses. He said, but the intensity, I'm over it's like the massive, like the bubbling over, it's now simmered. And no doubt he's still sad. So it's not like the sadness goes away, but the overwhelming intensity and the denial, the bargaining, the anger, all that stuff, it's much more, he's articulated and all, it's just much more contained, as it were, in that sense. Right. And so what I like to tell people, and I hate, now that you've said that, I don't use an analogy, but the analogy I use is like there's like a tear savings account or a tank of tears, that when we get wounded, all of a sudden, especially when we're victimized, it's like someone put tears in us all of a sudden, so to speak. And we don't know how big the tank is, but you got to cry until you get them. You just got to cry until you realize, okay, it'll get down shallow, and that's enough. That's what grief isn't forever, perhaps. But there's enough that's going to, and when I meet people usually is by the time they barely touch the tank, right? They've barely been sad enough. And so I have to say none of that they have no release valve. But the intensity can die down once you've gone this grief over a period of time. When it doesn't go down over a period of time, that's pretty new to the DSM, called chronic grief. It goes by other names. But chronic grief, after 6 months to a year, 10 to 15% of people say they still have an acute emotional states of grief. They can't stop weeping. I know a woman in particular, her husband died of cancer, and after a year or two, she'd meet me from time to time. And as soon as you see her, she'd weep every time. And she'd feel so badly. I'm so sorry, I hate that I can't stop crying. And she was mad about it, and she couldn't stop. And she didn't do as much therapy. I say, you talking to therapy? Well, a little bit here and there. And she just weep all the time. We typically call this chronic grief. Sherwood's definition, I think, is pretty standard. He says chronic grief is distinguished from normal grief by feelings of hopelessness, loss of meaning or belief systems, intense preoccupation, longing for a lost one, apathy, a lingering sense of disbelief, avoidance of situational thoughts, sometimes distressing, intrusive thoughts related to loss, reminiscent trauma symptoms. And of course, this can be very bad if it's untreated. These are people they just won't move on. These are people who seem not to be able to move on. They're more prone to chronic grief if you've had experienced unexpected traumatic loss like sudden death or violence, catastrophic injury. You were not prepared for that at all. Those with historical and mental health issues, substance abuse, childhood abuse, neglect. There's several reasons why. Yes, ma'am? Was it Van?
Oh, I raised me, I'm feeling inspired again. So,
All right.
I mean, I don't like to do it at the beginning because I
That's
get
right.
scared. So I have to so.
Can I say this last thing?
Yeah.
There is therapy even for chronic grief. There's help for that. There's still help for it. But some people, including this room perhaps, I don't know, if you find yourself that you seem like you've gone through the steps and you still have immense, intense, acute grief problems, that's a different issue as well. But most people don't get to that stage because most people's intensities do die down. They do it simmers. It simmers. Sonia lost her husband over a year ago. And I mean, she's expressed to me there was an intense moment for a long time. Still sad, you should be. But I mean, it's clearly not as intense as it used to be, right? Appetite comes back a little bit eventually. It just right up and down, right? And that's exactly. And I like that. We talked about how the frequency might be kind of you feel like you bottom out, you kind of go up a little bit, and it's kind of like that, as it were, kind of like that. And that's absolutely normal. It's when you find yourself doing this. That's chronic grief. That's when you just can't. That's real rough stuff. So,
Doing what?
but there's still help. Going down and staying down. Yeah, going up, then going down. Going up, going down, that's normal. If you find yourself after the grief bottoming out and you stay in a constant state of these things we've been describing, then you might need more intense help for a therapist.
That's me.
Okay. And we can talk, I would love if you talk with Brock a little bit after me about some of that. That'd be great. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. I will make sure that, I'll tell you there's hope even if you have chronic grief. There's
Yeah.
still hope. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to.
Thank you for sharing that. Really, it takes a lot of courage to all these strange faces, but I appreciate that, and I'm glad you shared, and you're safe to share that, and I appreciate that. And it is amazing how God can take our seemingly worst moments of life,
Oh, yeah.
redeem them when we give them to Him, and take us out of the pit.
Right.
And we don't have to be perfect before that happens. We don't ever be anything besides He loves us. And so praise God for that. That encourages me that He's bringing out that, and I'm glad you're here. You have every reason to be sad and grief and forgiveness, and I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I think God has sent you here for that providential reason. I do,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm glad you're here part of that. Yeah, for real. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
One thing I
Go ahead,
don't
Lisa.
quite know where this is going, but it keeps rattling around.
Very good point. Physical trauma is different from emotional trauma. Very much so. And that's the key difference. We can't relive stubbing the toe without re-stubbing the toe. We have memory about it. But the emotional trauma, for whatever good reason, we can relive it. Or it's relived upon us sometimes by intrusive thoughts. So that's a very good point. Brock?
And I think that's because emotional, it's in our head, but I don't know where it's actually located all the time, but I think it has to do a little bit more with cognitive reorganizing something that's very complex. I mean, it's easy enough for me to go over and kick something really hard and say, maybe I shouldn't do that again. But I think when we're dealing with complex loss issues, and those are all attached to our very existence. I mean, there's a long chain of attachments that we have, and they all remind us of one or the other, and it's all kind of tied together. That's a much more complicated puzzle to get through, and I think that kind of pain is more persistent because it is really one of those things we have to stay with to really get to that point of resolution. Not even the right word to use, but to something beyond it. And I don't mean by resolution the traditional meaning of it. I mean something different is over there. But that's probably why it persists. If that was, I think that's what your question was. But that's just a theory from another person who has a lot of theories. I mean, that's all at the top of my head. You know,
Again, it's like, I do think the brain's I completely agree. I think trauma is both in the mind, which is a soul issue, and in the brain.
Right.
And it is like re-kicking your toe, but in your brain, when your thoughts can help form the gray matter. So rethinking horrible things is like re-stubbing your toe. There's a physiological response in the brain that releases the chemicals of sadness and whatever and depression. So in that sense, I think it's very similar, but they're not the same thing because it's both a soul issue, which is immaterial, emotional, and brain. Though stubbing my toe is not. It's, I would say, purely physical. I'm not thinking anything about it. But in a similar way, I can kick it and it causes brain chemicals to start if I hit it really hard. Let me say this real briefly at the end, and we'll wrap up on this tonight if that's okay. That's good. And then next week we can have some more ideas for next week as well. You might need a non-judgmental friend or therapist who can help you, and don't be ashamed to get it, period. Please don't be ashamed to get help. God can bring healing through someone else. If you're a friend, here's some tips. Be with them in their grief. Be with them. Listen, validate their pain. What most people do are one of two things. Either A, they don't want to hear it, and they demonstrate that by not listening, looking away, I'm sorry, I don't want to hear it, and they run off, or they don't hang around their friend anymore. That's one big way most people deal with it. The other big thing most people deal with is they become your parent, and they tell you what you should feel, what you should be doing, how to get over it. And I see that all the time, especially when prayer request time. And I always try to model good prayer requests by talking about maybe real struggles in my life. And I know for a fact there's going to be a handful of people in every group that go, David, why have you just done so-and-so? As if my prayer request is what I really said was, will you please tell me what to do right now? I need a parent. And then they answer that prayer request on the spot. But that's not what I asked. I asked them to pray for me. But what most people think is they're being good friends by telling you what to do. And they'll mask it as, I'm just trying to be a blessing. I'm just trying to help you. What you're doing is not at all. Most people have a real hard time with grief. They feel very uncomfortable, causing a lot of anxiety. And to get their anxiety to stop, they want you to stop crying. So they'll do whatever it takes to get you to be quiet so they can feel better about themselves. It's not altruistic most of the times.
Right.
Hate to break it to you. So if you want to find a good friend, if you want to be that good friend, don't tell them what to think or do or feel. Just be there with them. Listen, validate the pain. I'm so sorry you're sad. Tell me more. Listen. They don't need another parent in their mind. They have one already. It's usually judging them. Don't tell them what to feel. It's not your job. It's your job to be a safe place during this chaotic experience. Can you be a safe place for them? If you can't, then you're not that friend for them. And that's okay. Not everyone has that capacity. But you're a safe place. You always want to affirm appropriate behavior. Like, it's okay to be angry, weep like that, and so forth. You encourage them when you need it. Have you eaten a meal lately? When's the last time you exercised or went for a walk? I'll go with you. But you're not being preachy. They get plenty of that in their own mind. And you know the difference, don't we? All know the difference if someone says, honey, I love you. When's the last time you ate? Versus what you should be doing is talking to a nutritionist tomorrow. They're very different. Our tone, our commandments are very different versus I'll be happy to be alongside you. And of course, know your own boundaries. Don't transfer. You don't want to have, it doesn't help them if you weep uncontrollably every time too. If you weep more than they do, there's something wrong with you, right? That triggers, hey, you got your own mama daddy issues or something like that, and it makes you're not ready to be that friend for them in that moment. And you can say that. You can say, I'm so sorry, it's bringing up in me my own wounds. I haven't fully healed yet. Now I realize I'm not prepared for that. But that's not what you can't fix it. Your problem is not your problem. Don't go home obsessing about it all the time. And if you can't find yourself separating from the person in boundaries, they need to find someone else. If you find yourself just as burdened as they are, you're not just being a good Christian, you have overstepped your own boundaries and you've lost yourself. Their sadness, their anger, their rage, their depression is theirs. You're there to help them. Support, be a safe place, but not to bear. You can't literally bear their burdens. So you can't, there's to be separate. And you pray for them, you serve them. Does that make sense? That's the goal. You're a resource as much as you can be, but you don't have to go broke and go crazy just to make sure you bend over backwards, but you're doing it and it's a safe spot. To encourage you, if you need to reach out to a person, these are the signs you're looking for. Test the waters. Test the waters. Sonia told me a story one time of a person who probably meant well, who said, okay, you've cried enough. You shouldn't be crying anymore. I said, what? She said, that's not right, right? I said, no, it's not right. No. And that person might love you and be a friend in many other ways, but that was bad advice. So that person they're not ready for you right now. Not in your sadness. And many of us, quite frankly, don't have friends like that. Many of us don't have friends like that. Be honest with yourself. How many people have friends where you know it's safe to be very sad around them and they're not awkward and uncomfortable? Most people don't have friends like that. They put on such a facade and a hypocritical face of it's all happy because they're deep down, they're afraid. If I really was fully real with the person, that person wouldn't like me. And there's a bit of pretending for a long time. Some people can't even take off their makeup. Some guys, you talk to them in slices of time. I'll call them when I'm in a good mood. And that's unfortunate. And so instead of bickering about everybody else's problem, start being the kind of person you want to have other people to be. Start being the person who's safe and validating and warm and allows the person, hey, you can be mad around me, be sad. We're not getting coffee just when you're happy. You don't have to make me laugh all the time. You're not my clown. Come talk to me. Let's go. I can be around when you're sad too. You want those friends, if you can get even one, that you can hang out with them and you don't have to impress them. You don't have to entertain them. You know what I'm saying? Isn't that awesome? I know you two are like that. Let's go to dinner together and just sit there in silence for a while. And I still love her just as much. Right? And that's good. That's safe. That's good. How's your day? It was bad. Tell me about it. Versus, oh, well, look on the bright side. Have you given it to Jesus? Nope. You failed that one. Try again. Just own it. I'm going to wrap up on that now. But next time we'll talk a little more about this with forgiveness because it's very similar to forgiveness. Brock, any advice on that?
I couldn't say better.
God bless you. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about grief, and then we'll move on to forgiveness. And I hope that you'll keep exploring this. Yes, sir.
I think there's a question here with Linda.
Was it Linda? Question? Comment? We'll wrap up on this. Linda, thank you for sharing your loss. And I want to pray for you, Linda. I want to pray right now for you and pray as a group. And I want to say this as clear as I can. Whether you're able to believe it or accept it is one thing, and I understand that. But the Jesus that I know, that's presented in the Gospels and presented in my own religious experience, guarantees that while you are alive on this earth, you're here on purpose. And you're here as a citizen of the kingdom of God. And we have no idea, any of us, how in the world to come, how all of the people will be affected or influenced by us. We just don't know. We don't know the domino effects we're having by every conversation, every amount of love, every amount of time not just being weak and expressing like you've done tonight can encourage and challenge people. So you are here, and as long as you are here, and I want you to stay here for a long time, you're here in the kingdom of God. Period. So I will keep praying that God gives you the wisdom and the clarity as that moves forward, and that you get your friends, and we're all going to pray for that. Let's pray right now as we close. We thank you, Heavenly Father, that you love us and care for us. We pray especially now for those tonight who are in the middle of or have just come from immense grief. As Linda shared, I'm sure just a small portion of her story of the immense amount of loss that she's experienced. God, I thank you for her courage to open up about that and the honest question that she reaches out to you for, and many of us do at different times in our lives, of why are we here? God, please remind Linda, please remind all of us tonight and those who struggle with this question, please remind us that we are absolutely loved by you. We do have purpose, we do have meaning, and the only reason we have it, Lord Jesus, is because of you. May we be part of the solution, not the problem. May we be the kind of people, as best as we can, in imperfect ways, be a safe place for others to fall, a safe place for other people to be imperfect and wounded, and that we set into motion a revival of being a safe place for those of us who are trying to be redeemed by you, Lord Jesus. Holy Spirit, please give us your wisdom to know how to be those kind of people, support for others, and please give us the wisdom to be able to open up ourselves to other people. It takes courage, and we need your courage to do that. Please help those who are grieving continue to grieve, continue to go through whatever cycle or stages they need to go through. And please, Lord Jesus, of course, please help those who are going through loss, any season that we're at. Have your hope, a real hope, that no matter how horrible it is in this life, the world to come, as Paul said, the glory that has come will far outweigh the sufferings we go through now. And in the meantime, Lord Jesus, help us be the kind of people who use the tools you've given us to use, like crying and like rejoicing with others and crying with others and being a support for them. Help us use those tools in the meantime so that we're still as active as we can be in the world. Other issues I don't know about, Lord Jesus, other worries, concerns, or joys, we bring those to you tonight as well. And we ask, of course, let your kingdom come on earth as is in heaven. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen more. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. There are tabs at the top that let you have access to all the podcasts I've recorded, to sermons I've done, books I've written. They're all there at davidpendergrass.com. You can also check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. And also look at my Twitter feed at glimpse the kingdom or at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass. There's tons of ways to reach out. I hope you will. Send me your questions, send me your comments. If you'd like to support the ministries of Glimpse of the Kingdom, you can also find ways to give online on davidpendergrass.com. If you'd like for me to come and do some consulting, check out my website, davidpendergrassconsulting.com, and I'll be happy to come out and speak to your organization and help and train any way I can. God bless you. See you online.